Acrylic paint versus oil paint. I'm not here to tell you which one is better. I'll do that in another video. Today I'm going to talk about why I switched from acrylic paint to oil paint. Now obviously this one isn't done yet, but it was right next to me, so it was easier to... Anyway, a very quick backstory is I began painting seriously in 2020. I started with acrylic paint, as many do. I quickly became obsessed and was pretty much either painting, thinking about painting, or learning about painting every single day during the pandemic. I turned this old tool shed into my art studio and sold paintings out of it for the next year and a half or so. But my interest in oil painting had been brewing behind the scenes the entire time. What pushed me over the edge initially was getting into the DeYoung Museum in San Francisco. They had something called the DeYoung Open where they were only looking for local artists. They took on, I think, 13,000 submissions and only brought 800 in, and I was lucky enough to be one of the 800. I was only like 8 months into painting or something at the time and got accepted, so it was a really big deal for me. While I was there, I just couldn't help that I was primarily drawn to all of the oil paintings. It was just so obvious to me which ones were oil, and I just knew as soon as I left there that when I got home, I wanted to begin learning and working with oils. But this decision wasn't based solely on my interest in oil paint. It was also a combination of that, plus some frustrations that I had that were growing with acrylic. And reason number one that I switched from acrylic to oil is the drying time. This is one of the largest misconceptions that I think there are about oil paint. Not that it isn't slow drying, but that somehow slow drying is a bad thing. People talk about it like it's some huge inconvenience, but it's literally one of my favorite things about working with oil paint. Because one of my biggest frustrations with acrylic paint is how quickly it dries on the palette. You have this really short period of time to use it before it's no longer usable. It'll start drying up or getting too sticky and it doesn't flow anymore. And I would mix a color or something that I really liked and then go to use it and it was already dry, so I'd have to remix it, but I wasn't able to match it identically. And now when I try to lay it on top of the other color that I made, it doesn't match. And it was just really, really frustrating. And I wasted a lot of paint this way and was just constantly remixing paint. And it was just one of my biggest frustrations by far with acrylic paint. Now, for those already saying or thinking, well, try one of those stay wet palettes. I did. Or try slow drying mediums. I did. Yes, these buy you a little bit more time, but ultimately you're still gonna get left with the same dried or sticky paint and it's just no longer usable. Case in point. This is already dry. Slow drying time with oil paint allows me to constantly make edits or adjustments as I go. I can use the same palette. I often use the same palette that I can mix today. Tomorrow night, a full 24 hours later, I'm still using the same palette. That's just a huge advantage. And I love the ability to go back and make edits on the fly. Paint is still wet on the palette. The paint is still wet on the canvas. That just really frees you up because a lot of times I'll make mistakes or want to make changes, or sometimes you paint something one night and the next day you don't love it. And when you see it and you want to be able to make an edit, and it just gives you so much more freedom to make adjustments on the go. And it's just by far one of my favorite things about oil paint. Reason number two that I switched from acrylic paint to oil paint is how it looks. The colors are just more saturated and rich and vibrant, all due to the higher pigment density. There's just a depth with oil painting that I was just never quite able to reach with acrylic. And honestly, most average viewers, maybe at a museum or just looking at artwork, might not be able to immediately notice the difference. It's something that I started to quickly develop an eye for. I just noticed that oil paintings were drawing my attention. I noticed when I found other artists that I like, they typically were always painting with oils. So it's just something visually so appealing to me. I like it a lot, and I just knew I wanted to start creating with it. There's just a smoothness to the oil edges and the way the colors lay on one another, and I just prefer it now over acrylic, which typically can be a little bit more rigid and thin. I just love the look of it. And the third and final reason that I switched from acrylic paint to oil paint is, if you paint, you probably already guessed it, blending. Blending, blending, blending. Bless it. One of the easiest ways by far to tell the difference between an acrylic painting and an oil painting is the blending. Since the oils are slow drying, you're able to create these incredibly smooth blends that you just can't quite do with acrylic, unless you are really, really good at it, because there are a few artists that I've seen that can do it pretty well. It's why some of the best portraits you'll ever see are with oils, because we're able to create these incredibly soft, smooth skin texture. It just gives you that hyper realism. It just really sets it apart from acrylic, and is by far the main reason that I switched to oil paint. I don't even like to overblend everything. I actually like a cool mix of certain things being blended blended and others being not, but it's just having that option to really blend and soften everything. It's just my favorite part about it by far. Now, I cannot reiterate this enough. I absolutely love acrylic paint. How I got my start. I don't know if I would have ever taken to painting the same way if I initially started with oil that I did with acrylic. So it'll always hold a special place with me. It's much more welcoming, the ease of use. I was able to quickly learn the basics of composition, color theory, layering, all of these things because of acrylic paint. Really allowed me to kind of dive in and not overthink it. And having a really solid foundation with all of these things because of acrylic paint allowed me to pick up oil painting much quicker. Because all I had to do at that point was adjust to the medium and not learn how to paint entirely from scratch. So I just wanted to make a video talking about this because I get a lot of questions about this, especially if I go live from people asking me what I'm using. And when I mentioned that I used to be acrylic, or people will always tell me that they're scared to paint with oils. And so I just wanted to give my reasoning for why I switched and kind of my opinion of the two. I'm going to be coming out with a bunch of other videos on what you need to get started with oil, maybe even just what you need to get started with acrylics, just to kind of give the basics, because I did have a hard time finding some really comforting information about oil paint. It seemed like everything kind of went straight into advanced or made it a little scarier than it needed to be. I think I can dumb it down even more because I like receiving information in a really simple way. And so I'm gonna come out with a bunch of videos kind of diving into that more. Tools to use, how to use it safely, because that's another really big question that I get. I'd love to hear which medium you prefer or which medium you use the most, what your experience was, if you're primarily with one or the other, or have you jumped back and forth. Yeah, I would love to hear which one you prefer or which one you use in the comments, and just let me know what you think. Acrylic, oil, both. There's room for everybody. And good night.